Katrina McPherson. Thank you, Eileen. Can you hear me? Good. So Kristi Abbott, right, is a writer who, despite being a national bestseller and a winner and nominee for countless awards, needs 4 introductions. She's also Eileen Rendahl, Lillian Bell, and Eileen Carr, who are the writer of psychological suspense thrillers, urban fantasy, chick lit, and cosy mysteries. So 4 names, 4 genres. What ties all 20 books together is the voice, a glorious, warm, funny, big-hearted, serious, sharp, slightly twisted voice. So like if Hitchcock wrote The Gilmore Girls and David Lynch filmed it as a musical. That's what these books are. And I'm looking forward tremendously to that voice coming to life as Gia Battista, who is a UC Davis drama graduate and founding artistic director of the Davis Shakespeare Ensemble. Yeah. Gia's going to perform a scene from Assault and Battery, as Elise said. It's the 3rd popcorn shop mystery featuring Rebecca Anderson, her poodle Sprocket, and the life-changing bacon pecan caramel popcorn balls from downstairs. The books are lighter than air-popped corn, but they're morally centred. They're snarky about romance, but they're very serious about friendship. They're the literary equivalent of a pink hat at a march on Washington, I think. Yeah. I love and admire them as much as I love and admire Kristi, Lillian, and both Eileens. So join me in a round of applause for her and for Gia.
All right, how are we doing? I'm not used to being tall. I wore my heels tonight. Okay. This is Assault and Buttery, excerpt from chapter 1. I walked over to the bars of my jail cell. Hey! Anybody out there? I want my phone call! Don't I get a phone call? My voice echoed down the short hallway. I could practically hear my voice bouncing off the door that shut the cell block off from the sheriff's department. Nobody answered. I waited a few minutes, then yelled again. More echoes. Still no answers. Something made my heart flutter. Not in a good, I just saw a boy I think is cute kind of way, but like in a bad, how did I end up in this bank of 4 cells off a concrete hallway with a big old steel door at the end kind of way? I wasn't sure what it was that made the flutter, but I thought it might be fear. Well, screw fear. I flung myself onto my bunk and immediately regretted it. The mattress was beyond thin. The metal springs beneath it reverberated up my spine and made my head ache. I needed to come up with a plan. I needed to think. Too bad the red-hot haze of fury covered everything in my brain with a deep coat of rage. The rage did help push the fear to the far edges of my consciousness, though, so it wasn't entirely useless. I pulled my legs up crisscross applesauce and tried to do some of the deep breathing and exercises Annie, my flower child and more than one way friend, had been teaching me to help deal with the stress of having my kitchen under construction again. Not cooking was hard on me. Having my business closed just as I was starting to get it off the ground was even harder. At first I sounded like a horse that had been rode hard and put away wet. Nothing but deep snorts out of my nose. They echoed off the cement block walls around me. After a few repetitions, however, the red haze in my head receded to a pinkish tone and then down almost to a rosy hue, and my breathing became even and deep. Tension flowed out of my neck and shoulders, down my arms and out my fingertips. I wouldn't say I was at peace, but I could think in something other than expletives. You settling down now? A woman lay on the bottom bunk of the cell next to mine, her arm flung over her face. I'd been so angry about my situation and intent on letting the world know it, I hadn't even noticed her there when I'd been let in or when my cell had been locked. Behind me, or when Sheriff Dan Cooper, my brother-in-law, and the person I considered my best friend, had then walked out of the cell block and shut the door behind him. It took me a few minutes to recognize the woman in the cell. I was used to seeing her with her hair done, her makeup perfect, her designer clothes pressed and lovely, not in an orange jumpsuit and with an inch of gray roots showing on her scalp and without so much as lip gloss. "Hi, Kathy, I didn't realize this was where you were. Did you think I was on a cruise to the Bahamas?" She didn't move her arm away from her face. "Or perhaps spending a little time in Paris?" I hadn't thought that. I hadn't thought much since I'd read about her arrest on the front page of the Grand Lake Sentinel. It had been big news. Of course, my various arrests had also been front-page news in the Sentinel. This current one hadn't yet, but given time, I was sure they'd get to it. I hoped they wouldn't use my mugshot this time. It never looked good. Something about the lighting was permanently unflattering. I'm on the pale side. Fluorescents totally wash me out. The difference between the news of my various arrests and Kathy's, however, was that it looked like Kathy might actually have done what she was accused of doing. I was always innocent of all charges. Well, innocent-ish, at the very least. "No, I guess I hadn't thought about where you'd be while you waited for your trial," I finally answered. "When all your assets are seized as evidence in an investigation, it's a little tricky to make your bail." She turned on her side, so her back was to me. I had been dismissed. Whatever. It wasn't like I'd be here long. It was all a mistake, a miscarriage of justice, a terrible blunder. I went back to the bars and yelled some more. No one came until I resorted to running my comb up and down the bars and yelling, "Attica! Attica!" The green metal door at the end of the corridor flew open. All 6'2" of Deputy Glenn Huerta strode in. "Settle down," he growled at me. "Why on earth are you making such a ruckus?" "Because I haven't had my phone call." I crossed my arms over my chest and glared at him. I'm tall, but Glenn's taller, and broader, and significantly more muscly. I didn't care. I was not backing down. I was pissed, and I was pretty sure my rights were being violated in some way. Perhaps a dozen of ways. The man would not keep me down. Glenn snorted. "You don't have a lawyer. I heard Garrett fired you as a client. Who you gonna call?" I resisted the temptation to answer with, "Ghostbusters!" It wasn't a joking matter. Glenn had heard right. My boyfriend, who had also been my lawyer through a few misadventures, was part of the reason I was locked up in the first place. So I said, "I'm gonna call your girlfriend." "I don't have a girlfriend, he blushed. "Yeah, right. You don't have a girlfriend, and I don't have a knife sharpener." The rage was seeping back. I took another step toward my bars to go eyeball to eyeball with Huerta. "I want my phone call." He glared, but said, "I'll see what I can do." When I had mentioned Glenn's girlfriend, I had been referring to Cynthia Harlan. Cynthia was a kick-ass lawyer, a real looker, and Garrett's ex. I couldn't think of a more perfect choice to get me out of my present pickle. She'd do the job, and we'd piss off Garrett and Dan in the process, which suited me just fine. The two of them had pissed me off plenty. Huerta hadn't pissed me off, but it was fun to watch Cynthia and him when they were around each other. Whenever she and Huerta were in the same room together, the sexual tension was so thick I doubt I could have cut it with my sharpest knife, and I have some pretty damn sharp knives. I hadn't been joking about my sharpener. I went back to my bunk and sat down more carefully. I'm not sure what that mattress was, but it was definitely not a pillow top. My back was going to kill me if I had to sleep on that thing. I wouldn't have to, though. Cynthia would get me out. I looked around, but there really wasn't anything to look at. My cell had one bunk bed, one sink, and one metal toilet with no seat. There wasn't even any interesting graffiti on the walls, nothing to distract myself with to make the time go faster. I twisted around so I was facing Kathy's cell. "You've been in here the whole time? Since your arrest?" I asked her back. There was a hesitation, then she rolled over so she was facing me. "Yep, right here. Except for the hour each day that I get to go out and exercise. Oh, and shower time. That's always a treat." She did look pale and haggard. Her skin looked rough and dry. Did I mention those gray roots? I didn't feel sorry for her, though. If the accusations that were leveled against her were true and the evidence being stacked up certainly made it look that way, she deserved it. She'd been the city comptroller for 6 years, one of the most trusted women in Grand Lake. She'd been the project manager for pretty much every improvement in town, every pothole that got filled, every new ramada put up in a park, every expansion to the library went through Kathy Hanover. She'd been efficient and calm and resourceful. That had been true of how she'd run those projects and also apparently true of how she'd bilked tens of thousands of dollars from the city of Grand Lake over the last 6 years. It had been a clever scam, really. She created fake vendors, complete with bank accounts in nearby towns. Then those vendors had bid on projects being done in Grand Lake. Not big stuff, not the renovation of the high school cafeteria that had cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Little things, supplying paper towels or nails for other projects. A few $100s here, a few there. Nothing big enough to make anyone raise an eyebrow, but plenty once it added up. "So what are you in for?" she asked. "Obstruction of justice." She put her arm back over her eyes. "Amateur." It hadn't been my intention to obstruct justice. I'd actually been seeking justice when I showed up at Lloyd McLaughlin's wake. Of course, it was mainly justice for me, although I figured Lloyd would get a little bit along the way. Call it enlightened self-interest. So enlightened, in fact, that I didn't even feel bad that he wasn't my first priority. Well, not super bad. After all, I hadn't even known who Lloyd was when he died. I'd first heard about his death at dinner with my sister Haley, my bestie brother-in-law, Sheriff Dan Cooper, and my boo, who was at the time still my lawyer, Garrett Mills. "You okay?" I'd asked Dan as we cleared the table. His plate had still been half full at the end of the meal, and he was usually nothing if not a good eater. It all seemed to go directly to his shoulders, which were broad and strong, but he was almost always a member of the Clean Plate Club, especially if I helped cook. "I saw something today I can't seem to unsee," he winced. "It's actually more that I smelled something that I can't seem to unsmell." "What happened?" That did not sound good. "I'm surprised you don't already know." He crossed his arms over his chest and shot me some side-eye. "You seem to know about almost everything that goes on in this town before I do." I knew what he meant, although I didn't think he should get pissy with me about it. I didn't set out to be one of the premier stops on the gossip underground of Grand Lake. It just happened that way. Besides, it wasn't that way at the moment. My gourmet popcorn shop, Pops, was closed while damage from a grease fire was being repaired. Most of the time I heard stuff because people come in for a cup of coffee and some Cocoa Pop fudge, no shop, Cocoa Pop, no gossip. "It's not like I go out seeking it," I said. "It comes to me. It probably helps that nobody sees me as the man." Sharing a juicy tidbit with someone who gives you chocolate is totally different than informing on someone to the local constabulary. "She's right," Garrett said. "No one wants to be a rat. Snitches get stitches." I smiled at him for backing me up and for being generally a nice guy and for being cute and for being a good kisser. Dan looked down at his uniform. I can see that. He hesitated a moment more and then blurted, "Lloyd McLaughlin died." The name hadn't rung one single bell for me. Not even a tinkle of the smallest kind of bell. "Who?" "Lloyd McLaughlin. Lived out by Highway 2 and one of the new developments. Did some kind of computer consulting," Dan said. I shook my head. "Nope. Never heard of him. I apparently didn't go to high school with him, and he apparently doesn't eat popcorn." Those would be the two main ways I knew everyone I knew in Grand Lake. How did he die? We're not sure yet, but it didn't look natural. That pained expression passed over Dan's face. However, he died. It was messy. I paused mid-plate scrape. "Murder? Again?" Dan rubbed his face. "I know. It's getting to be a little too commonplace around here for my tastes." "Way too commonplace," Haley said. She glanced over at me from her spot at the end of the table. Baby Emily slept peacefully in her arms. Haley looked like she was about 2 seconds from sleep herself. "You know, before you moved back, we hadn't had a murder in Grand Lake since Clea Tamarack hit her husband over the head with a frying pan for forgetting to pick up milk on the way home, and there are some who still count that as accidental." How on earth could that be seen as accidental? Garrett asked. He hadn't lived here long, and he was still learning our ways. Haley shrugged. She said she was waving the pan in the air to dry it, and Albert's head got in the way. Garrett stared. And people believed her? Haley shifted my niece in her arms and stuck her hand out and made a comme ci, comme ça gesture. Nothing's impossible, and Albert was really frustrating. Still, that was the last one before you moved home, she pointed at me. You're blaming me? I stared at my sister in disbelief. She readjusted the baby in her arms. No, but it's starting to feel weird. You know what I mean? I did. I didn't want to admit it, but I did. This would be the third murder in less than a year. I sat down next to Dan. I take it the scene was pretty bad. He leaned back in his chair and let his head loll back. It wasn't a day on the lake, that's for sure. I put my hand over his. I knew all too well what it felt like to stumble across a dead body. I knew how it could haunt you, popping into your mind at the most inopportune moments. I knew how it could change how you saw your life and your food. Anything I can do? I asked. He shot bolt upright. No, there's absolutely nothing you can do. This has nothing to do with you, and you need to stay out of it. Rebecca, I'm serious. I sat back stung. I know that. I don't even know who this Lloyd guy is. Why on earth would I have anything to do with it? All I know is that you would not keep your nose out of the last 2 murders in Grand Lake. You poked and prodded, and you were nearly killed twice, Dan said. And you nearly got me killed in the process, Haley said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. You also nearly had me giving birth on the back porch of Pop's. I'm with Dan. Stay out of it. I looked over to Garrett for some backup, but he was sitting with his arms crossed over his chest and absolutely no smile on his lips whatsoever. He was still cute and still a good kisser. But I wasn't so sure he had my back on this one. It didn't seem fair. I hadn't asked to be embroiled in Coco's murder or in Melanie's murder. It had been bad luck, a stupid series of unfortunate incidents. Crazy mixed-up fate that had me twisted up and unraveling what had happened to them. On the other hand, they had a point. While I'd helped bring 2 murders to justice, I'd come damn close to being sacrificed on the altar of truth. I raised my right hand in the air. I solemnly swear to stay out of it. Excellent, Dan said. Besides, I have my own mystery to solve, I said. Haley cocked her head to one side. You mean the diary? I did mean the diary. Days before, while Carson and I had been pulling down the remnants of the wall in what was left of my kitchen after the grease fire that had been supposed to demolish both me and Pops, we'd found a diary. Well, find might be exaggerating. We jumped back and squealed like kids on a roller coaster when it unexpectedly fell out of the wall at our feet. We hadn't known what it was at first. It was wrapped in an old pillowcase and it looked like a bundle of dirty clothes. Carson and I had both stared at it and then each other. Pick it up and see what it is, I said. Carson had shaken his giant dandelion of a head. Really, he has the most amazing hair. And I said, I found some freaky-ass stuff in walls. You pick it up. It's your shop. Yeah, but I'm paying for you to fix it, I pointed out. Not enough, he snapped back. He was right. He could have charged me more. He might have been Grand Lake High's head stoner back in the day, but now he was Grand Lake's most reliable contractor. I was definitely getting the friends and family rate from him. Apparently you had to pay full price to get him to deal with freaky stuff. I couldn't dispute the fairness of the arrangement. I had taken a deep breath and poked the pillowcase with a yardstick and had been relieved that whatever was inside the pillowcase was hard, since I figured something dead would be soft. I'd crouched down, picked up the pillowcase by the tiniest part of the corner that I could pinch between my finger and thumb and shaken. A book had tumbled out. Both Carson and I had let the air out of our lungs with a whoosh. He clutched his chest. Oh man, Rebecca, I thought it was going to be a dead baby. He sat down heavily on one of my spindly ice cream chairs. Seriously? That's the first place your mind goes? Dead babies? I sat down next to him, my heart beating too hard for having just unearthed a book from a pillowcase, even though I swear dead babies never crossed my mind. I'd been more focused on a severed hand for some reason. You've had kind of a bad run with dead bodies, you know, and this was small, definitely not a full-sized customer. Carson ran his hand through his hair, making it stand up even taller. I'm aware. I reached down and picked up the book. The cover was a faded pink with a few water stains marring it, but not marring it enough that you couldn't read the words, "My Diary," in a dark pink cursive script across the front. "Whose diary do you think it is?" Carson asked. Not a clue. I pressed the button and the lock popped open. There was no name on the inside bookplate. No address, no marker, no introduction. It had just started in. May 17, Friday. I cannot believe I'm home again on a Friday evening when everyone else is out. I can see them from my bedroom window. GT, Shoop, Twinkle Toes. They're all there, walking up and down, sitting on benches, eating ice cream, talking to each other like normal people. Me, I'm inside, reading. I hate my mother. I want to kill myself. I gasped and showed the entry to Carson. Do you think she really wanted to kill herself? Do you think this is like a suicide note? Carson took the book from my hand and leafed through. No. Or if she did mean it, she changed her mind. This thing goes on for another 50 or 60 pages. Plus, teenage girls are kind of into all the drama, right? He was right. It was probably how I sounded when I was 15. All drama, all the time. I flipped a few pages forward and read an entry from a few weeks later. Went to the lake with Bubbles yesterday. We swam all the way out to the buoy and back, then back to her house. Man, can she swim. Her mom made us popcorn and hot chocolate when we got to her place. Boy, that lake sure is cold. Bubbles. I knew someone whose nickname was Bubbles. Well, I didn't really know the person. I carried her DNA. I put my finger on the name. I think that's my grandmother, Ella Connor. I remember Mom once telling me that Grandma's nickname in high school was Bubbles because she could stay underwater longer than anyone else by blowing bubbles. Whoever wrote this diary knew my grandmother. I barely got to know my grandmother. She died in a boating accident when I was 7. Now here she was on this diary page, and she was eating popcorn. Popcorn! Maybe popcorn was in my blood. Très cool, Carson said. I wonder what other fun factoids are in there. I wonder who the diary writer was, I said. I shut the diary and put it in my bag. I'll read more tonight and see what I can figure out. Figuring out who wrote that diary now seemed like a faraway fairy tale as I sat in my cell waiting for my lawyer. Huerta had let me out to make the call to Cynthia, who had had trouble stopping her hysterical laughter when I explained why I needed her to come to Grand Lake. Seriously? Dan arrested you again? She cackled. Yes, but it feels different this time. This time they put me in a cell and made me put on one of those orange jumpsuits. I looked down at my new outfit. The legs were too short, and the waist was too big, and whoever had washed it had clearly not used fabric softener. Dan had never made me put on the jumpsuit before. I'd always gotten to wear my own clothes, and been out in an hour. I'll be there as soon as I can, she said.